Between 19th and 21st of December 2019, 23 Muslims were killed in Uttar Pradesh in 9 districts. Families of 20 of them say they were killed by police. An overwhelming majority of them were killed after the Friday prayers. In Bijnor, 22-year-old Muhammad Anas was shot in the eye. 20 years old Suleiman was killed after being shot in the chest. In Firozabad, 24 years old Arman was shot in the chest. Muhammad Shafiq, 40 years old, was shot in the head. Muhammad Harun, 36, was shot in the neck. Muhammad Arbab, 26, was shot in the spine. Mukim, 20, was hit in the back by a bullet near his shoulder. Nabijan, 22, was shot in the chest. Rashid, 27, was killed by a head injury. In Kanpur, Aftab Alam, 23, was shot in the chest. Muhammad Saif, 25, was shot in the stomach and hand. Raiz Khan, 30, was hit in the throat. In Lucknow, Muhammad Wakil, 25, was shot in the abdomen. In Meerut, Ali Mansari, 24, was shot in the head. Asif, 23, was shot in the back. Muhammad Asif, 20, was shot in the chest. Mohsin, 28, was shot in the head. Zahir Khan, 45, was shot in the head. In Muzaffarnagar, Muhammad Noor, 30, was shot in the head. In Rampur, Faiz Khan, 25, was shot in the throat. In Sambal, Bilal Pasha, 31, was shot in the face. Muhammad Shahroz, 22, was shot in the stomach. In Varanasi, 8-year-old Muhammad Sagir was crushed in a stampede. Each one of them had a story, a life. Most of them were young parents. I have been to more than half of these people's houses, and I really don't know how I'm going to tell this story, doing justice to each one of them. And I'm not. This episode is about how a Muslim life is valued in our system. How the state kill, bury, and erase people from this country.
There's not been a single incident of killing which has been registered as a killing, and that there's independent investigation conducted of that, which is what the Allahabad High Court had asked, and every other court. So lots of people have gone to the Supreme Court on this matter, and lots of people have raised other the people have also gone to international avenues, etc., to NHRC. And yet, after the passage of 4 years, there's not been a single case where the process of law, as it is written in the law, in the statutes, that you will register a case if there's enough preliminary evidence that a crime has happened, and this was a crime against the police, of killings.
You're listening to Khakiland, stories of police and Muslims in India. I hope you stay with us.
So my name is Sajjad Hussain, and so I work with victims of human rights violations in India and the wider South Asia region. Yeah, so this work that I started doing happened after I resigned from the Indian Administrative Service in 2012. So I was in the IAS for several years, was mostly working in Manipur state.
Sajjad Hussain was part of the fact-finding team that looked into the police carnage on 20th December 2019. And he has worked closely with survivors to bring justice to the people who were killed. And after 5 years, he has a story to tell.
Citizenship Amendment Act, CAA as we normally call it, became an emblem of, I think, several things that were happening prior to the legislation. And there were lots of things inherently wrong with the law itself. But then because it came at the back of several preceding things, and that's why I think it generated the kind of response from from particularly Muslim community in India, but also also people who believe in equality, who believe in the constitution, students across the country. I think this is over the last 20, 30 years, there's nothing been like this. I'm talking about the response to it, the resistance to it and the opposition to it on the streets. Even the farmers' movement wasn't, and which is the other big moment of resistance to what are perceived as wrongful acts, etc., wasn't anywhere close to it. So there are inherently a few things with the Citizenship Amendment Act itself. Inherently, it is discriminatory. It has been sold as a law that will fast track, that will make life easier for immigrants from the 2-3 countries in the neighborhood who are minorities in those countries, so that they can get citizenship here and in a fast track manner rather than 11 years, so that it normally takes maybe much shorter. But that's just one part of the problem. The problem is basically that it completely excludes Muslims. So it's great to have India's traditionally been welcoming for refugees historically. That's why you find large body of Tibetans in the country, Tamils, and lots of people from especially the region. But what happened with the CAA was that it tried to convert all of that into something which was both discriminatory, because it was seeing things from a religious angle. The Constitution bars discrimination based on religion, but here you're bringing religion as a specific category, saying that everyone except Muslims from those countries would find easy citizenship in the country. It's good to have fast-track citizenship, but then it should be open to everybody. It should not be qualified with religion. The argument has been that no, Muslims are majority in these countries that are mentioned. So firstly, why just these 3 countries? Why shouldn't also be Sri Lanka, for example, or Nepal or Myanmar and other places? Number one. Number two, if it is just Pakistan and Bangladesh and Afghanistan, then why not Muslims as well? Muslims are also persecuted there. Shias would be persecuted most of these places, Ahmadis, etc. So why not open it up to everyone? So having this selective thing, and being selective is not random. There was a purpose to it, because it was being seen from a Hindu nationalist perspective, and that's why you found that perspective reflected in the bill that the BJP proposed, and finally in the act, in the law that was enacted. So those are the inherent problems, primarily. But also, going back to your question about why it was such a moment, I think it was coming, like I said earlier. So just before the CAA, the Babri Masjid ruling came from the Supreme Court, which basically ruled in favor of against the Muslim sort of petitioners, Muslim party in that case, and effectively what that did was, although recognizing that this was a big criminal act, the bringing down of the mosque, and the court recognized that, and yet you on the question of title and ownership, you pass it on to the opposing party, which partly was responsible for the criminal act. There were lots of protests, particularly, or attempts at protest, just after the Supreme Court ruling. This was November 2019. But we remember, I think, there was because government was also aware that there'll be some resistance, so there were these, Section 144 orders pretty much throughout Uttar Pradesh. Not many people know about this, but there was this thing, and therefore there was not that much of a protest you saw, etc. The same orders continued through to December and later. So the government never withdrew, authorities or local authorities never withdrew those orders from November. The previous 2-3 years, there was this trend of lynchings, trend of extrajudicial killings, hate speech. So this was just building up. And I think the CAA was the moment when people said enough is enough and we do need to do something about it. There were also, going back, and this is several years ago, right? So we'll have to jog our memory, but all of this thing about the connection between NRC, CAA, and actual statements reported many a time how the Assam NRC would be expanded to the rest of the country. So there's a lot of fear in the particularly the Muslim community, but also people who believe in and that's the majority section which believes in constitution, which believes in equal rights, etc. I mean, what was happening was clearly authorities, the police, and the local authorities, both in Delhi and in Aligarh and in lots of other places, cracking down on peaceful protest. And that is not acceptable, right? I mean, that is not something that you expect. So to answer your question, no, it came as a shock. And only later, I think the following days, the following weeks, the extent of the crackdown became apparent. And I'm not even talking of what happened in Uttar Pradesh on the 19th or 20th. I'm just talking of Delhi and Aligarh, right? So the attack on the library in Jamia, the police sort of barged into that, but also, basically the police entering the campus and going after students, going into hostels, including women's hostels, into libraries, etc. And the same thing had happened in Aligarh as well, where they fired into hostel rooms. The environment in Delhi was also getting quite bad. I remember, and I think this is 5 years ago, so maybe my memory might be failing me, but I think it was the same week when I remember that there were friends living in Dwarka who were, and we were, where I lived, the fear was that something would happen to anybody, So it's not just about Jamia and what was happening there, but it was also, I think a couple of mosques were also attacked, etc. I don't remember, it was the same week, but definitely around the same time, last week of December 2019, when things were just getting worse and worse and worse every day. So I think the news was very patchy, etc. But I think it would be around the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, around that time, after the incident, that we started getting news of, and because we had already visited, I mean, I had visited along with a few friends, Aligarh. This was on the 15th, must have been 16th, 17th, after the incident in Aligarh. And once you're there, I mean, so what happened on that incident, but then there was also a build-up. There was, the sense that we got that things were getting from bad to worse. But then we started getting hints and news of the UP incidents on the 19th of December, I think a few days later. And then quickly, I remember there were a couple of groups that do documentation work, etc., and who started to plan to visit, etc. We were also trying to see how we could support them with some information, etc. But this thing was happening, and then it became very clear to me and to people in our people in our circles that the news that was coming out, whatever little was coming out, or even the patchy fact-finding mission, somebody going to one district and doing that and coming back, that was very fragmented. That the sense was that something big had happened, and this was not localized in one district or the other district, that this was something that was bigger. And that's when we decided, along with other people who were similarly concerned and who wanted to understand what was the thing, that we needed to do something more detailed, visit several districts. So that came much later, because we were able to only travel in January second week, I think. So there's a big gap between the news started coming in and our own visit. But I think that was a good thing, because then we had the initial information, etc. So then we could also plan which districts to go to, right? So that you have a bigger picture, etc. But I think the initial information that was coming out was very patchy. It was bits in here, as you say. Internet was shut also for a few days, but there was still information coming. And the picture that was emerging was that protests had happened after the Friday prayers in several districts, and there was an attempt by authorities to prevent that, whereas people were basically protesting, as in, I mean, you come out of Friday prayers, and these are traditionally when people gather, and then, if you have, there's a petition that you want to take to the, and this is what they were doing. They were trying to take these petitions and hand it over to the district magistrate, saying we are against the CAA, should be taken back, etc. This is protest. This is established method of protest in the country, in any country. This is the most peaceful way to do it. But then when the information that was emerging was that there was an attempt to prevent that from happening. There was also an attempt to try to, using all strong tactics to prevent people even gathering outside mosques on the Friday, etc. And also the police provoking, but not just police, non-state actors working closely to the police, provoking Muslims in pockets wherever they were doing this. And it was not just Muslims who were protesting. There were lots of other civil society, whatever level civil society there is on the ground. They were also doing it in Lucknow. Again, it was a capital, so you had more of that. But you also had, opposition parties, for instance. Lots of opposition party groups were also doing it in district towns together with other people. It was only once we went and visited that we understood the range, the extent and the scope of what had happened. We were a bunch of, I think, 5 to 10 sort of individuals from different informal groups, etc., civil society groups, mostly traveling out of Delhi, but also linked to people, in different districts. So we went to Muzaffarnagar, we went to Meerut, we went to Firozabad, we went to Bijnor, Badaयूं, Rampur, Lucknow, Kanpur. So these were the 7-8 places that we went to, and it was all, we were trying to do in a compact period of about 10 days, visiting one after the other. And that was the first visit. We followed it up with a visit later in February as well. But the first one was really to try to understand what had happened. Who were the people, because lots of news was coming out. So, there were people killed in police firings, but also firings generally in the processions and in the melee, in the confusion. So people killed, large-scale detention of people, arrests. In specific districts, these also included children. We heard stories of how several, particularly in Muzaffarnagar, but also a few other places, Muslim institutions such as a Muslim seminary in Muzaffarnagar, basically teaching children, school for children, that was attacked brutally. The entire building sort of, from the inside, smashed, doors broken, fans. I remember and asking myself the question, who could have, so the blades of the fans across these rooms in the hostels, in the offices, they were all mangled. And we were just wondering, for somebody to have done that must have had so much rage that they wanted to visit so much violence on people that, in a building, you're doing this. I mean, bathroom, sort of everything smashed, computers, things like that. This was a seminary in Muzaffarnagar, and all the children were picked up along with the principal, and they were in custody. And we did a separate fact finding just on that and a few other incidents where children were involved. And what came out from testimonies, from things, was meaning literally gory tales of how of torture of children, but also of the school management. The principal, an old man, 78 years old, when he came out of prison, of detention, he was bleeding all over the body. etc. So you can imagine the kind of torture they don't talk about it because, and that's the other story of how then the police tried to shut down everybody not to talk, because then they said that, we will do this against you, etc., etc. And the police has several tools to prevent you from speaking up or doing that. So the first visit was really to try to map the extent of the violence visited by, and this was violence. Unlike the Delhi violence further in February, this was basically about state violence by the police. But in several places, we also heard that that there were other private actors as well who were coordinating with the police, just as you saw probably also in Jamia matter. But here it was more systematic. So yeah, I mean, killings and several of them, we counted 22 people killed in police firings, and each one of them, and this only became clear because when we went there first in January, people did not even have their post-mortem reports even by then, and they were trying to obtain it, and that's when their struggle for justice started, and that has continued to this day. We can talk about that later. But we realized later on, when we were able to collect all the post-mortem reports and all the medical reports and everything, and when you matched it to photographs that people had, because people had seen, because they were, the bodies were given to them, that all of these shots were either to the head, to the chest. So clearly this was targeted. The police, going back to the Allahabad High Court PIL case, there were a couple of hearings held in January and February where the police and the state government was saying that people were killed, and I think they gave some small number, 5, 6, 7 people were killed in firings between protesters themselves. So they were not taking responsibility. With our fact finding, then we intervened in the High Court, along with so the court had actually appointed a amicus, and we were working with the amicus, and we provided our initial fact finding report where we said, no, these are all shots to the torso, upper part of the body, and if you look at the post-mortem reports that came later, that these were all injuries clearly pointing to use of weapons and bullets that the police use and not available. So a significant hint that this was police killings by the police, etc. Across 27 incidents, I think 23 people died on that single day across the state in these protests by the police, and 22 were police killings, and all of these had chest or head injuries. Mass, literally thousands of people detained. In Muzaffarnagar and other places, also houses attacked when the police started searching. In Kanpur, and there are lots of videos there, but we also talked to families. We saw those houses ourselves where they came, they smashed up everything. And then they also took young men off, etc. So all kinds of things. And this is what came about in the fact finding. Like I said, when we went to do a follow-up there in February, it was to try to understand what the police did, because police was not only the actor in this case, but it was also the agency which owns the criminal justice system, right? So you need to register a case of killing, investigate, and etc., etc. So because there was also this atmosphere of fear, naturally. I mean, there was such a big and organized attack by police and authorities in each one of these districts, resulting in many deaths. So there were lots of apprehensions. So it was only rare when we went the first time, but also the second time, that survivors or victims even could muster the courage to go and try to file a FIR against the police in their thanas. One or two, I remember, did try. There was a lot of backlash. But then lots of lawyers joined, lots of other people joined, and that's when the process of trying to help them to at least begin to file cases and cases under the appropriate sections of CRPC, of murder, and naming individuals. So many people knew who the police person who was responsible for this. They knew, whether it was the local SHO or it was a particular SI or a particular constable, etc. These are small places. People know who was there, who was leading the police bandobast. So that's when it began. Just to conclude, you asked a question whether you think this was something bigger or it was something local. No, the fact that so I think that big fact finding, what it helped us, because we were able to piece together this picture of what had happened across the state, not just in one district, and the pattern that we saw of the police action, but also what happened after and what happened before. That there were people, including the chief minister of the state, who was saying that we will not allow any protest to happen. There were recordings we heard of specific district police chiefs, SPs, saying do whatever, asking the police teams, police force to do whatever they could do to prevent any action, and if there's anyone who's that we will protect you, but as long as so he was basically giving them a complete free rein to do whatever to prevent protest from happening. So clearly this was a top-down sort of direction, and once political leadership gives you that freedom, then of course the police knows that they can do anything, including using extreme force, and extreme force results in deaths, and not just lathi charge, or not just preventing people from doing things, and they can do anything that they like, and this is what we saw, and this was happening literally in 18-19 districts. So in the documentation we did, I think we covered about 19-20. In at least 12 of them there was killings and other kinds of extreme violence. In some others there would be maybe people were not killed, but there was other forms of state action. So this was clearly a pattern. It was not a random something that went out of hand in a particular district, resulting in death of people. So it was much bigger than a localized incident. So and why Friday prayers? People across everywhere pray, and because the previous week had been so surcharged with CAA law just having come out, so people were protesting wherever. But in those districts and district headquarters where killings happen, I think the police leadership, but also police on the front line, they interpreted the freedom that was given to them by the political leaders to do whatever they wished, and that resulted in those deaths, etc.
When questions about the violence was raised in the state assembly, Chief Minister of the state, Yogi Adityanath, said, "Police should be appreciated. If someone is coming to die, how can he be alive? If someone comes out to kill an innocent person and he is challenged by police, then either he or the policeman has to die." But then Yogi went on to say, no one died of police bullet.
Yeah, so in those fact findings, the atmosphere was so surcharged that it was impossible to find the opportunity to talk to police and ask them, because this was basically, all the allegations were about them directly. But there's been a constant attempt by victims, by survivors, by civil society, by lawyers, everyone, to try to get the police to engage with these crimes that happened, right? And these were very serious crimes: deaths, torture in custody, etc. So I can speak to that. I can't tell you, because I did not meet, or we did not directly meet in the fact findings. Police officers asked them for their views. Their views were in the fact that what they felt about it. The fact across, again, talking of pattern, across these places, wherever people had been killed, we heard one story. People were not allowed to take their bodies and bury it where they wanted to bury. They were all forced to bury the bodies 50 kilometers away, 100 kilometers away, etc. And we understood why they were doing it. They didn't want those burials to become another moment for protest, right? So you're denying people. So if I die, I want to be buried where I want to be buried, which would be next to my parents, my ancestors, my family, etc. You're forcing me, so you're preventing me from doing that. You're not giving me postmortem report. You're not giving me medical report. Also, the fact that in hospitals, so a lot of people died not on the spot, but because there were bullet injuries. If they had access to quick medical support, they would have survived. But lots of hospitals, and we spoke to a few of them, but also particularly because these were families who were mostly that we were speaking with. They told us, and we heard this story, several districts, that many private hospitals refused to admit the patient when they came with these bullet injuries and other grievous injuries, and if they had been attended to then, they would have survived. And they also that the excuse given was that there were directions not to from authorities, from local authorities. Government hospital, the same thing. In any case, I mean, we even heard in one place, I think it was Meerut, or was it? I think it was Meerut or Muzaffarnagar, that some of the politicians, ruling party politicians, were actually sitting in those big hospitals, or they were sitting with police authorities, with maybe the SP or the SHO, etc., and essentially coordinating how hospitals or how clinics would either accept or not accept. So there was a lot of that happening. So this was the attitude. I mean, this is the evidence. I mean, you don't have to ask them why this happened. You see their actions, and the actions were very clear. The pattern was very clear, right? And this is again not just hearsay, not just testimonies. This is documentary evidence, photographs of people killed, the fact that they were not allowed to bury them, the fact that they were not allowed to take the bodies unless they signed off. In some cases, they had to sign undertakings that they will not bury, in their own locality, or they will not do this, they will not protest, etc. So the police's role was but what post that, like I said, second fact finding, and what has happened since, especially with lawyers and things. I mean, I can tell you that across those cases, and like I said, 22 killed in about 10 districts. There's not been a single incident of killing which has been registered as a killing, and that there's independent investigation conducted of that, which is what the Allahabad High Court had asked, and every other court. So lots of people have gone to the Supreme Court on this matter, and lots of people have raised other the people have also gone to international avenues, etc., to NHRC. And yet, after the passage of 4 years, there's not been a single case where the process of law, as it is written in the law, in the statutes, that you will register a case if there is enough preliminary evidence that a crime has happened, and this was a crime against the police of killings, so that you register under Section 302 of CRPC, the former one, and that there's independent investigation, and then things will happen. There's not been a single one. NHRC conducted spot inquiry, I think 2 years after the incident, after a lot of pressure from civil society. Their report has not come out yet. The High Court heard these cases on 3 occasions, in January and February, and then after mid-February, it wasn't heard, and then COVID came and the court was shut. Lawyers, including the amicus and everyone, they tried to restart it in 2023, 2024, and then the court dismissed that. The Allahabad High Court said there's nothing in this matter now. We will close it. So victim groups and lawyers representing them went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, go back to the High Court, ask them. because I mean I can get into those details why and on what grounds the Allahabad High Court closed it. They said there was a similar matter in Aligarh matter thing, the violence in Aligarh, and they closed that matter because the NHRC said something about Aligarh, and they said that Aligarh matter is closed, so we will also close this case which involved 22 killings across the state. It had nothing to do with Aligarh. They closed that as well without any reasoning, any logic, etc. Supreme Court said, okay, if this was the case, then please go back to them and ask them to reopen. Great. So now people are pursuing the High Court there. Again, so we've talked about NHRC, we've talked about High Court, we've talked about Supreme Court. On the ground, attempts by victims. Like I said, there's not been a single. Most cases, police, if they registered anything, after 1 or 2 years, they submitted to the courts a closure report, and that was the end of it. Victims have tried to go back and reopen those cases, challenge them by providing further evidence. It's slow going, like 4 years. But in lots of other cases, there's not even a case registered. So forget about investigation on the matter. The cases that they've registered is of people getting killed, violence, and there were these protesters who were throwing stones at us. They destroyed property, etc., etc. And it was those cases that then allowed them to arrest lots of people, keep them in prison for 6 months, 7 months. Now they've all been released, but it took a long time. Lots of these people also had their houses, their shops and things. And yeah, so they were actually acted against the same individuals, asking for compensating the loss to public property, to private property. It was turning the entire case upside down, making the victims the perpetrators in the way the police recorded, and that's what they have continued doing.
On a very basic human level, I believe it would be overwhelming for you to look at these cases initially and try to understand. And when you go to these victims, you also have this perceived pressure from the survivors, you will bring justice or some sort of an accountability or shed light to the problem over there. On a personal level, what toll did it have on you?
Toll on me? There's no toll on me. I mean, except the fact that it is so disappointing. The real toll is on the victims, right? And people who are directly there. But if your question is about me and people like me, it is the disappointment. I mean, firstly, that, yeah, it is, I think, disappointment. I've not been affected directly, in that sense. Nobody from my family has been killed. My house has not been, sort of smashed, or people have not been detained, etc. But because of this episode, I have experienced what lost people have failed, and working with other people, trying to see if there's some way in which victims can get some acknowledgement for the crimes and some justice, but even just acknowledgement. And even that hasn't happened. So I think what it leaves you with is essentially just disappointment. It's a complete failure, and it's disappointment with every institution, frankly. A democracy should not be working like this, honestly. That somebody who was, you said, at a human level, somebody who was a worker in a bangle factory in Firozabad, for instance, who's coming back from his day's shift, and he sees this protest happening at the main crossing in the town, and like we all do, we are great people, great spectators for anything that is happening, and he was there. And then in the melee, police start firing, and this person got hit in the head, and that's the end of his life. And the impact it has on the family. He was probably the only breadwinner of the family, this young person, or one of the very few, etc. He leaves behind a widow, some children, old parents, etc. They have so there's the immediate loss, I mean, of the life, but also the loss to the family, livelihood, utter sort of devastation. Their world is shattered, and then those who seek to, most people in our country, given these situations and given the context, they just carry on with their life. Law, justice does not come naturally. It will come naturally to you and I, who are educated, who have the means, who have the connections, who are aware, who will say, if something happens, I'll go to the court, I'll do this, etc. For the common person on the street, that is not the natural thing to do. But many of them have decided to do, to seek justice, to demand it, even to get, like I said, even to ensure that there's some acknowledgement by public body, saying that this person was killed, just that, and he was killed wrongfully, he was killed illegally, potentially the police was involved. Just saying that. They haven't even gotten that. Forget about any compensation that might compensate them for their life, for the loss of livelihood, etc. And of course, any attempt at seeking justice, accountability for whosoever it was killed. Because if you don't do that, then these things keep happening. And over these 4 years, despite the attempts for all the victims, all the lawyers, all the civil society, all this, if there's nothing that has happened, not one of those things, forget accountability, forget compensation, forget acknowledgement, it's massively disappointing, right? And this is not how democracy should be conducting itself, frankly.
You have visited these families. Are you in touch with any of these families? What are they saying now? Have they given up? What is the general sense of these people who have survived?
Yeah, so I mean, naturally, it's been 4 years, 5 years almost. Life goes on, life moves on, right? So I mean, the initial 2, 3, 4, 5 months was that, and then COVID came, so all of that happened. So I think so most people would have. We've been in touch. I've been in touch with a few families, not all, but there are also, yeah. So life goes on, and again, the what is left behind for the family, the widow, the children, the parents. So I think that those struggles are the bigger ones. But then even there, you find that there are some people, some of them, who are willing to carry on despite failing all of these years. So some have definitely, and I can think of a few that come to mind straight away, who, despite the pressures of ensuring that they keep on earning whatever the 200, 300 rupees they earn every day, still take time out to go to the police, to the court or the police station repeatedly, to be present when for instance, the NHRC spot inquiry happened 2 years back. Despite a lot of apprehension about what will happen, because once they have given the testimony and it is known to the public, then the police will come after them. Many of them have faced backlash. They've had to, move out of their city, their town, go to some other place because the police was constantly coming after them, especially the ones. So the moment you start to seek justice, there's backlash. If you're quiet, if you carry on, there'll be no disturbance. So all of that is happening, and despite that, and despite all the challenges, everything, one day to the court means 1 day of livelihood lost. These are things that might not mean a lot to us, but for the person who earns just 200, 300, it's a thing. And so despite that, some people have continued, and yet there's nothing, there's no light at the end of the tunnel, as we say. But what else do they have? They just have this struggle to carry on with.
In terms of international law, you work in the framework of international law. How do you frame what happened in UP that day? There are war crimes such as, on one extent, there are atrocities. Then there are like the crimes against humanity, which has been the term that has been repeatedly used about what happened in UP. How do you tell people about what happened on December 19th?
Yeah, so So I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but the little that I know about international law is there are two aspects to this. One is the international human rights law, and that will be relevant to these incidents that are happening in the country. And then the other is international criminal law. So international human rights law, there are certain standards when it comes to life, civil political rights, life, liberty, freedoms, etc. And then there are socioeconomic rights, and you have the International Convention on Civil Political Rights, ICCPR, and then you have something on the economic, social, cultural rights. So those form the basis, and they set out standards, right? So, for instance, torture is banned in international law, and that is probably the most glaring gap when it comes to international law and our domestic law. There is no law in domestic space on preventing torture, and torture is something that, whether you have signed up, because countries have to sign up to these, you have to ratify international treaties, etc., which form the body of international law. So whether you have signed up, you have ratified, not ratified, you can't do torture, full stop. And if you believe in international law, if you believe in the UN system, etc., then it's called non-derogable rights. So you just cannot say that, because of these things I can't do this, because of these things I can't do this. And there are many exit clauses, many ways in which you can exclude yourself from specific provisions of international law, but torture, and there are some other things as well, you just can't. And yet we have this big thing. So that just to give you a sample of international law and domestic law, and because we are talking about torture in many contexts, not just in the UPCA killings, but torture is a fact of life in our country. So that's a big thing. So to come to your point, international human rights law, I mean, just framing everything that happens in the country, including the Uttar Pradesh CAA killings or the abuses, basing it just on domestic law, we believe is not adequate, because just as I said on the question of torture, not everything in the domestic law is perfect. At the law level, I'm not talking about implementation. That's where the bigger problem is. But even at the level of the theory, the yardstick, there are big gaps. So it's really important to do that. But then there's the other aspect of international law, which is international criminal law, right? And that is where the individual. So international human rights law is about standards and what states should do and what you should do. You should change these laws. But just like criminal law in the domestic space, international criminal law is about individual complicity, individual responsibility, right? So who's responsible for a serious crime? The difference in domestic and international criminal law, from what I understand, is that in international criminal law, it is big crimes which are seen to be like crimes against the entire world and not just small ones, that are taken to be international crimes. So genocide is an international crime. If you commit a genocide in Bosnia, 9,000 people were killed in Srebrenica, it is not just about Bosnia, it is about the entire world. Genocide was committed in Germany against Jews. It's not just about Jews, it's not just about Germany, it's about the entire world, right? It's against humanity, and that's why you call it crimes against humanity. So it's not just about crimes in one or two places, etc. So that's genocide, and there are 2 or 3 of those international crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity. So genocide, we understand, when you want to finish off an entire community, right? Whether it is 9,000 people, or in Rwanda 1 million people, or in Germany 6 million people or more, is still the attempt. If you had the chance, you would destroy the entire Bosnian Muslim population, not just 9,000. So the intent question is important, as we are seeing also in the context of Gaza and Palestine and Israel, etc. So that's genocide. Crimes against humanity is where you have. So it doesn't involve you want to finish off an entire community, but what you're doing is widespread and systematic, and that's where the international experts that have looked at what has happened in UP, because we're talking of the UP crimes, because it was several districts at the same time, 20, 25 districts, killings, torture, detention, collective punishment, shutting off shops, demanding that you compensate, etc., etc. So it is widespread, as in not just one place but multiple places, but also systematic. And systematic is when you're seeing the same pattern happening everywhere. So there has to be something, there has to be a direction, there has to be a common, so somebody decides that we will do this, and we'll do this in a widespread manner, and it is systematic. So it is organized. It's not random. Those are the two elements, my little understanding, non-legal, of crimes against humanity. You see exactly that thing in UP, as we've discussed already. Multiple districts, same pattern, both of police action, the prevention, they try to prevent, but also prevent people from peacefully protesting, then use of excessive force, and then what happened after, resulting in the killings, etc. So the pattern is the same, and that's why lots of experts have deemed this as possible crime against humanity, and that there's a bigger, higher, and that's where the question of command responsibility comes. That it is not the constable who fired the gun, it is the person who ordered on the ground at the frontline level, maybe in the district, etc. But it's also the leadership, police leadership at the center, political leadership in the state. And because the police functions in an organized fashion, police is not a ragtag army, ragtag gang, right? So there's an organized thing, there's clear command, control. So if it is so widespread and so systematic, then it has to be a direction from the top that then people on the ground use in their own ways, like I was saying. So if you have the freedom, if you're given the sense of you can do whatever, but you should not allow this thing to happen at all, then you do everything that's there, and that is the result finally. So that's what people, and that's the reason why people are saying that it is possible. So again, this will be a result of an investigation, should an investigation happen using international criminal law. But the elements, so international experts who've looked at things like the Rwanda, who have been prosecutors in the Rwanda tribunal, who've led investigations in Myanmar, who led investigations in other places, when they've seen the evidence, they say that there's a high degree of there's a significant chance that this is crimes against humanity, and that it requires deep investigation.
This episode was produced by me, Shaheen Abdullah, for Maktoob Media. Thank you for listening.